Hello, I'm Geeta Gurumurthy. This is the Iran War Today, bringing you up to date with all you need to know on the US-Israel war with Iran. Let's start with some of today's key developments. Donald Trump says he believes Iran's supreme leader is still alive, despite not being seen in public since the US-Israeli attack, which killed his father. Iran and Oman outline plans for a new shipping route in the Strait of Hormuz, but Tehran says the waterway won't reopen unless the US removes its naval blockade and stops the conflict on all fronts. Benjamin Netanyahu says he told Donald Trump a diplomatic deal with Iran is impossible, saying the country's leaders are savages. Dubai Airport says passenger numbers dropped more than 30% compared to last year, with the war contributing to passenger uncertainty and rising jet fuel costs. US President Donald Trump says he believes Iran's supreme leader is still alive. Mojtaba Khamenei hasn't been seen since he took power after his father was killed when the US and Israel launched the war on Iran. Speaking to conservative radio host Glenn Beck, President Trump said Mojtaba Khamenei was seriously wounded in the joint US-Israeli attack, but is not dead. Let's speak to Hasher Jonedi from BBC Persian, the BBC's Persian language service. Hasher, just tell me what we know at the moment about Iran's leadership at this point.
Frankly, there is not much to be known about the whereabouts of Mojtaba Khamenei and how he is. He's been the leader, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic, almost for the past 6 months after his father's assassination in the American-Israeli attack on Iran on the first day of the war on February 28th. And as the leader, he's also the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And it's very curious to have a commander-in-chief who's been missing in action for almost the entire time of him being in this position. Now, the regime says they're concerned that if his picture, if a film of him or his audio is released, then the Americans and the Israelis could find his whereabouts and then try to assassinate him. So it's because of his security that we are not hearing from him and we are not seeing him. But considering the situation in Iran, Iran is in a no war, no peace situation in the past 6 months. The economy is in a very bad shape, and the free fall of the rial, the national currency, carries on. And in this situation, having a leader who's not seen and not heard of is very questionable. Now, a few days ago, past week, the Iranian president Masoud Pezeshkian said that he has had a very fruitful meeting with Mojtaba Khamenei, the leader. He said that the meeting took about 7 hours. And then there was a video that was published of this meeting showing both men, Masoud Pezeshkian, the president, and Mojtaba Khamenei, the leader, sitting on the floor talking to each other. But then there were concerns and there were questions about the authenticity of this video, and they were saying that this is a doctored video, it's being produced by AI and it's not genuine.
Okay, Kasher, stay with us, because a top Iranian official says proposals for a new temporary shared shipping route through the Strait of Hormuz have been agreed with Oman, but details are still being confirmed. It follows talks between diplomats in Tehran to work out a phased framework for managing the vital waterway, which sits between Iran and Oman. Traffic through the strait dropped dramatically when the war began and continues to be very limited. Iran and Oman's foreign ministers also discussed a mine-clearing project in the strait during the talks, but Kazem Garibabadi warned that the strait will not reopen unless the United States lifts its naval blockade and ends the war on all fronts. On Tuesday, Donald Trump again claimed that all mines have been removed and or detonated from within the international waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has been notified that any ship or boat planting new mines will be immediately and systematically destroyed. Let's go back to Hasher Jonedi from BBC Persian. Are we any closer to the Strait of Hormuz actually reopening?
It very much depends on the result of indirect talks between Iran and the Americans. We know that in the past few days, diplomatic talks continued between Iran, Oman, Iran and Qatar, and also the commander of the Pakistani army, Marshal Asem Munir, was in Tehran. So diplomatic talks are carrying on. Iran and Oman have announced some sort of breakthrough in the talks. Of course, they've been talking for weeks, and Iran is accusing the Americans of interfering in these talks and damaging the chances of finding a faster solution. But now they're saying that they're almost there. But at the same time, the IRGC is calling on the Americans to meet all Iran's conditions before the Strait of Hormuz blockade is going to be lifted by Iran. A spokesperson for the IRGC, General Mohebbi, today was speaking that unless the Americans don't lift the naval blockade against Iran and Iran's oil exports are resumed from the Persian Gulf area, Iran will not open the Strait of Hormuz. So the main problem there is that Iran wants the Americans to return to the MOU, the very MOU that was cancelled by the Americans because of Iran's attacks on ships going through the southern route of the Strait of Hormuz. And I have to add that the IRGC is saying that amid reports from the Americans and what President Trump stated, they say that they have full control over the Strait of Hormuz, including the southern route that goes close to the coastline of Oman.
Okay, Kasher Janish from BBC Persian, thanks so much for that update. Well, Israel's Prime Minister says a diplomatic deal between the US and Iran to end the war isn't possible. Benjamin Netanyahu has long been sceptical of diplomacy with Iran. He openly campaigned against a 2015 nuclear deal brokered under President Obama and had pushed for years for US military intervention. There have been regional efforts to get the US and Iran back to the negotiating table to try to end the conflict. But Mr. Netanyahu says he told the US president that diplomacy wouldn't work.
I told him there is one option, of course, which is to reach an agreement, a good agreement. We have no objection to that. I doubt, however, that an agreement can be reached with that group there, with those savages. I tell you, an agreement cannot be reached.
Meanwhile, Iran's president says the US will not achieve anything with economic pressure after President Trump set out plans to collapse Iran's economy. The US said it had launched an economic onslaught against Iran's financial connections around the globe. That includes sanctions on digital assets, technology, gold, aviation and shipping. Any nation financially partnering with Iran would also be isolated by the US. Tehran said it expected the measures and had plans to deal with them. Well, these shopkeepers in the southern port city of Bandar Abbas say that American sanctions are making things harder, but they remain defiant over the tactics.
We are not unfamiliar with the sanctions, nor are we afraid of their exaggerations. After all, they aren't without purpose, but they aren't 100% effective.
Well, America is speaking like a bully, definitely. America's actions are completely impossible. It's like if I go to my neighbour's house and tell my neighbour, "You have no right to eat bread from tonight, you must eat whatever I tell you." Well, 100% my neighbour will complain.
Under any circumstances, sanctions do inflict blows. The rise in the exchange rate affects life and livelihood. But ultimately, we are Iranians, and Iranians know how to bypass sanctions well.
Well, as the war heads towards the 6-month mark, the impact on business is still being felt around the globe. One of the first sectors hit was air travel, and business is still struggling. Dubai International Airport has revealed passenger traffic fell more than 30% in the first 6 months of this year. Aircraft movements through the key hub were also down almost a third on the same time last year. In 2025, nearly 1 in 6 connecting passengers worldwide passed through the Middle East, but passenger uncertainty, soaring jet fuel prices and airspace closures are taking a big toll. And it's not just airports in the region. London's Gatwick Airport says profits fell nearly a fifth over the last 6 months because of the impact of the Iran war on passenger numbers. Simon Browning has more details.
2026 has been testing for airlines and airports around the world because of the outset of the Iran war. And we've been seeing that in lots of financial results that have been published by some of the industry's biggest players today. Dubai Airport, one of the biggest airports in the world and in the Middle East, has said it saw a 30% decline in passenger numbers this half of the year compared to 2025. It said in the second quarter of this year, passenger numbers have rebounded, but it's still millions behind the numbers that it saw last year. Many international carriers have still suspended their routes to the region because it's cautious about the impact of the war, while many operators have resumed services back into Dubai Airport. Here in the UK, Gatwick, one of the UK's biggest airport, has also seen an impact on its profits because passenger numbers passing through the airport have also fallen. It said confidence was not because of the outset of the Iran war, and many people simply stopped booking their holidays because of fears about being stranded overseas because of jet fuel supplies. Many long-distance routes also saw a fall in passengers because of cooling consumer demand. It's also said that here in the UK, many families have left it right until the last minute to book their summer holidays overseas, and many deciding only to travel to destinations close to the UK, like Western Europe, Spain, Italy and Greece, because they've continued to weigh up the geopolitical environment before they make their bookings, continually impacting the profits and passenger numbers of these international airports.
Whether you are joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thanks for your time. We'll be back soon with another Iran War Today.